panel. Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for what I'm sure has been a interesting 4 breakout sessions. We're looking forward to the plenary shortly after this to get started with hearing back from what the rooms have been discussing. I have been given until 4:20 to conclude this panel, and I am determined to be able to do that. So I'm going to call on our kind ambassadors and speakers to keep our interventions relatively brief so that we can go to the audience for discussion. We've got some really great youth activists and youth speakers here as well, and we'd love to call on them for discussion in the latter half of this panel. So my name is Nudhara Yusuf. I facilitate the Global Governance Innovation Network with the Stimson Center, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to this concluding plenary, including those who are joining us online. This will be the last live-streamed session for this global policy dialogue. We heard this morning about the role of the Global South in addressing the triple planetary crisis, but we need to remember that the Global South is not one homogeneous entity. And within the South, there are different regional priorities and indeed comparative advantages in achieving just transition. There's also the question of how globally regions interact and the collective action required to promote climate justice. So I'm glad to welcome you all to our session on South-South and inter-regional cooperation towards achieving climate justice and promoting just transition. We have a brilliant lineup of speakers with us today. We have Ambassador Carlos Lazare, who is the Executive Director of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. Formerly, he was the Ambassador of Brazil in Ecuador and in Lima, and amongst several other positions and diplomatic responsibilities throughout his career. So thank you, Ambassador. Really glad to have you here. We have Ambassador Keisha McGuire, who is the President and CEO of the Present and Future Institution and former permanent representative of Grenada to the United Nations, as well as Chair of the UN Special Committee on Decolonization. Glad to have you join us. Ambassador Ahmad Makarfi is Nigeria's ambassador to Brazil and an academic and former member of the Research Department Standing Committee on the National Research Foundation, and as well as director of the Agribusiness Incubator Center of the Federal University of the Dust Microfinance Bank, while at the Federal University of Dust. We also have with us Dr. Maria João Rodrigues, who is the president of the European Foundation of Progressive Studies and former Portuguese minister under Prime Minister Antonio Guterres. She's a long track in European institutions. And to save my breath, I will say she has been in EU presidencies, councils, European commissions, and European parliaments. We're also delighted to be joined online by Fernando Andrade, who is the climate change technical specialist with the UN Development Programme's Climate Promise. Previously, he was country program manager for the NDC support program and the Biodiversity Finance Initiative in Ecuador. Glad to have you join us online as well, Fernando. And just to also mention, all of these ambassadors will be followed by the formidable Adriana Abdenor as a respondent to have sort of a, so no pressure on that to the ambassadors as well. So just to kind of, I won't elaborate too much on this because again, I want to go back to the audience. So I believe the ambassador has slides. If we could pull yes, just a slide. So if we could just pull those up, please. And then Ambassador, over to you for your opening thoughts.
Yeah, I will be speaking in Portuguese, if you allow me. So just for you to know that I'll be sharing with you so that I can use my time correctly in my national language. Eu quero agradecer a todos aqui, aos organizadores.
I would like to thank everybody and the organizers for inviting me. The Secretary General of the organization couldn't be present, and I'm representing Senator. I asked to share these slides because this is the result of the topic we are called to discuss this afternoon, which is the SouthSouth Corporation. This is the observatory, the Amazon Observatory in Brasilia, at the headquarters of the organization, which is the only international organization with headquarters in Brazil, and it deals with the Amazon region. It exists since 1998, has been operating since 2002, and is based on a treaty which was signed in 1978. 1988, and South America has already resolved its diplomatic issues with regard to the two large basins in America. In 1969, the Treaty of the River Plate Basin was signed, and in 1988, the Treaty of the Amazon Corporation. So here we have the basic issues with regard to sovereignty, which have been addressed in these treaties, and which provides us with a condition to work in these areas of sustainable development, which is a great topic which has been posed to us by the Amazon Corporation Agreement. This slide, which you are seeing, is the result of the SouthSouth Corporation based on centers of excellency and production of good practices in the Amazon countries. And the idea is of the Amazon countries is to work in the framework of SouthSouth Corporation in a spirit of open regionalism, to use the information, the experiences, all that which is produced in the region in order to disseminate in the region itself and to go ahead with regard to sustainable development, achieve sustainable development without closing the door to contributions of actors and partners and allies from outside the region. This screen, which this slide which you're seeing, is the result of work done in Brazil by the National Water Agency, ANA, and thanks to the funds to the funding of the national government and the cooperation agency has been made possible. What we see here is a national observatory in order to study and include the more than 1,000 rivers and watercourses in the Amazon region. This involves also a network of hydrographic monitoring network with regard to the flow of all the rivers and watercourses, the sediments and the water quality. So this is work which is done in partnership with the 8 member countries of this Amazon basin, and with whom we work together, who are our partners. And so we have 334 physical and virtual stations. When I talk about virtual stations, then I talk about open regionalism, which involves also cooperation with France. France owns a technology which is called spatial hydrology, which is being used to monitor the hydrographic network of the Amazon region, and which enables to use a technology developed to measure the quantity of ice in the Andes and on the glaciers, and which is being transported in order to control the water flow in the rivers. With satellites, you are able to see the volume of water which will feed into the Amazon and also the sediments which come with it. So it's important to know that the whole flow of the Amazonas river water, it goes up the Gulf Stream, and it will impact Guyana, Venezuela, and Suriname, which this coastline is made up of mangrove areas in this northern region of South America. Everything is interlinked. And the SouthSouth Corporation involves also the partnership with the Andean community, because we cannot just address the Amazon region and leaving aside the Andes. It is just the same thing with regard to the River Plate Basin. We cannot just look at the Amazon and without taking into account the River Plate Basin and the Pantanal region. And this SouthSouth Corporation is the result of some parameters which have been established in the frame within the framework. One of them is this cooperation. We work with a constructive and positive agenda when it comes to working together with our neighbors in the Amazon region. We work with a view to strengthen public policies of each of these countries so that these public policies can have a trajectory of convergence with the other public policies in the other countries in the Amazon region, taking into account that the Amazon region is a unique geographical system and which has the same problems, and which requires solutions, unique solutions. So you can't just deal with the quality of the water in the Brazilian territory without taking into account the quality of the water in the springs of the Amazon, because we are downstream and the other countries are upstream. So we need to look at this in a holistic way, and this is also considered in the agreement. Our agenda of the treaty involves all the aspect of the sustainable development. When the countries decided to sign the treaty, the Amazon Corporation Treaty Organization, this was 8 years before the Brundtland report, and they found in 1978 1977, they also already addressed the issue of sustainable development. So instead of sustainable, you see the word harmonious development. So they already addressed the issues regarding to the indigenous villages and native indigenous people, and also involves commercial and trade navigation in the watercourses of the Amazon. And the other, this was the Amazon Corporation Treaty, ACT. And the other thing involved is reducing the asymmetries. The strengthening of public policies is a result of the perception that there is a double asymmetry in the Amazon. There is the asymmetry of the Amazon territories in each of these countries, and the asymmetry which exists between the Amazon territories in the countries. The Brazilian Amazon region has not the same characteristics as that in Bolivia or Suriname or Guyana, and they have different levels of development than those featured by the Amazon region in Brazil or Peru. So you need to look at this in an all-over perspective and in a pragmatic perspective. And what I was mentioning in our breakout session is that all of this is done in a very pragmatic perspective, and with a view to take things forward step by step, day by day. So this is also why we have been able all over time, so in this time with ideological, where there have been ideological differences, there's other differences between the countries, that we've been able to take this forward. And so we were able to, in spite of having countries who did not recognize the others. For example, the case of Venezuela, but we were able to keep at the same table the 8 countries in order to discuss measures and to solve issues which were just not going forward. And in COP15 in Montreal, the quick assessment of biodiversity has been addressed, and so we have been able to unleash another program, which was the Regional Forest Program, and which will be presented in the next assembly of the UNFF Forest Forum, and we are working in order to present this, and we were able to really solve a problem and of a memorandum of the integrated management of fire, which wasn't put into practice. And so we have had a cooperation with Italy, and this was a program called Amazon Without Fire. And this was a case, history of success, a success case. So this convergence of public policies is not something easy. To put this on the paper, so with regard also to the fact that there needs to be consensual decisions, so you need to look where you have common denominators and where you have convergence. And the other mission which the ACTO has is to work with the most reliable scientific information. So we are bringing together the best minds, the most brilliant minds of the 8 countries in order to address this. And a recent successful action was the unanimous approval by the 8 countries of the network of genomic network regarding zoonosis in the 8 countries. This means that we are building and developing a strategic health plan for all the Amazon region, which will involve this network, and also all the other different requirements of a strategic plan, such as surveillance, epidemiologic surveillance, all the endemic diseases in the region, control of the circulation of people, and all these other issues. In this genomic map and survey, we will bring together all the health departments of the governments of the 8 countries. This means not only genetic sequencing, but also to build the capacity of staff and people involved. So this work has been conducted in a spirit of SouthSouth Corporation, led by Brazil, which also released 80% of the funds. And this was one of the most positive actions which took place to benefit the Amazon region. This forest wasn't 80%, it was 20%. So this made it possible to approve the project to monitor the vegetal coverage in 2011. For Bolivia, Suriname, Guyana, and other countries, this was the opportunity to have, for the first time, monitoring center, and this was done not only using Brazilian resources and funds, but from the Amazon Fund. We're talking about 30% of the Amazon Fund, and also using the technology developed by INPE in Brazil. So 220 technicians of both countries, the countries were trained in Belém do Pará, in the regional center of INPE, of the National Space Research Institute, which made it possible to set up these monitoring rooms, and leading up to the Amazon Observatory, which also monitors the heat foci, focus of heat. So you can, this enables the surveillance of warmth to locate and identify warmth spots in the Amazon region. There's also a project called Sensipan, and which enables to create protocols to help the local managers to better use the information produced by these monitoring centers. Well, I won't go into further detail because, of course, I know the time is very short, very reduced. But I couldn't but mention an issue which is part of the cooperation and which enabled the unanimous approval by the 8 countries, which is a platform which we have presented recently in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, which is the platform of valuing of traditional knowledge of the local communities and indigenous people. So this means to abide to a clause established in the Paris Agreement, and former Minister Isabella Teixeira knows very well about that. So we are looking at valuing the traditional knowledge. Of course, everything which I have reported is not an easy task, and with regard to our young colleagues, we know that it's very difficult to set up this platform, particularly with regard to the legitimacy issue, having all raise their voices and being heard. And so this TCA is heading towards success. And the last thing, which is maybe a little bizarre, but which I wanted to mention, is that we work with the 8 countries looking at having a proactive attitude by all countries. And we know that in many fora it's easier and it's quicker when the situation requests reactive positions. In the case of this platform and ROTCA, one of the things which accelerated our reaction was a topic which came up during the government of President Dilma in 2011, when ICANN, which is the International Internet Institution, decided to open up a registry for the top-level domains, .com, .org, whatever, could be registered. And so the regions and in some countries decided to oppose these geographic denominations as part of the registry, .Africa, .Patagonia, .Europe. So they thought, so this couldn't be allowed because this would lead to complicated situations. There was an attempt, a successful attempt by the Amazon Corporation to register at ICANN .Amazon. The countries got together. They put forward a first reaction to that, and in the end, they mandated the Secretary General of TCA to promote at ICANN and this geographical denomination, which and so this was important work, and we had the unanimous support of the 8 countries. So this meant that we were able to veto the prohibition of geographic denomination. So the portfolio of ACT and ACTO is based on cooperation and a positive agenda between the 8 countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for really providing a sort of case study for the science policy interfaces that we discussed this morning, and potentially, also inclusive approaches that were also pointed out in this morning's panel. The observatory also focuses on information and data, and Ambassador McGuire, this is something that you've been advocating for through the form of vulnerability indexes, and so much more. So over to you to share your experiences with sort of the Latin American and Caribbean experience.
Thank you, Nudhara. And let me begin at the outset to thank our organizers, Adriana, Mayra, and the entire Plataforma SIPO team. And I cannot forget the co-organizers, Global Governance Innovation Network, the Stimson Center, Global Challenges Foundation, Foundation for European Progressive Studies, and the Heinrich Boll Foundation. Hope I got it correctly. But today's discussion on SouthSouth Corporation, in my humble opinion, and as you have intimated, Nudhara, it's something that has been the small island developing states view as critical. It is not just a matter of a theoretical discussion, esoterical. For us, this is, and I don't like to use this word because it's overused at the UN, but it is existential for us because it is only through cooperation, multifaceted cooperation, and really and truly meaningful cooperation that gives us the fit for purposes solutions that we are able to really thrive and survive and really make our societies sustainable. We talk about resilience. Resilience is not something, again, just to put in a paper or to be in a thesis, but for us, we are facing it today. We've had the call, I remember one of my first years at the UN, the Prime Minister of Dominica, the Honorable Prime Minister Skerritt, he made a call after the hurricane. He came during High Level Week, and they just was decimated by the hurricane. And and he talking about being on the front lines of the climate war. And that is the sort of context we need to think of this. How do we get past it? So again, we're in the global south, as as that term is used. And it's not just a matter of looking to others. We have to look within as well. So it is crucial for us to find some of these solutions for us because our perspective needs to be there. It needs to be there. We need to be at the table. We need to not be excluded, but we also need to look within. So for us, it's an issue that we've been advocating for, that we've been living, and we will continue to do it. But again, I think it's all triangular. It's not just north-south, south-south. We have to find a way where we have that sort of triangular cooperation. So while as Grenada's UN ambassador in New York and in my current role as president and CEO at PFI, I've had the ample opportunity to really reflect on and work to build the stronger SouthSouth Corporation on climate change, sustainable development, and other related issues. And I must say, it's always wonderful to be back in I would call it my wider home region, and I'm certainly enjoying the tranquility and beauty of Recife. So as I said before, the theme of this dialogue and our panel's focus align with one of the key visions that I have experienced in my former role and for the Present and Future Institute, PFI, and that is to continue to work on protection of just and safe Earth system boundaries and building that sort of South-South cooperation to deliver tangible impacts and fit-for-purpose solutions. I cannot underscore enough. Cooperation must stand at the heart of addressing these issues, which are by definition planetary and multidimensional. No single country or region can do it alone. So I know for all the criticisms for multilateralism, we need it. And I can tell you as small states, it is our bread and butter. It is our defense line, because many times that rule of law that emanates from that sort of cooperation, that emanates from these systems, we cannot stand alone because we don't have the might. Sometimes we don't have the resources. But again, we need to cooperate, and we all need to be there to give the perspective and be around the table. So we require cooperation at all levels to effectively address challenges such as climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, the triple planetary crisis, as we've been discussing over these past 2 days. We need, and I said, the cooperation is multidimensional because we need local cooperation, we need national cooperation, we need it at a regional basis, so we need regional cooperation, and as I've been advocating as well, we do need the multilateral cooperation. Traditionally, as we know, the multilateral cooperation has been north-south, but we are seeing greater and stronger SouthSouth Corporation, which is pivotal and encouraging. I can tell you during the COVID pandemic, it was SouthSouth Corporation that got, for example, in my region, in my country, vaccines first. It was with our cooperation with India that got us those vaccines, which again, was saving lives, and in a population of less than 100 or just over 110,000 people, one life lost is a lot. So that SouthSouth Corporation in India with our region, and again on a regional basis, many of this was done, that we were able to benefit from it, and in a real way that impacted lives. So again, all levels matter, none alone can achieve anything, and the Sustainable Development Goals disconnected from national or local planning would make it meaningless. We need to move together and progress together. So as our panel today is on SouthSouth Corporation to achieve climate justice and a just transition, I would like to share also some reflection on these ideas in the context that I've been speaking of, in the context of small islands. Often there's a perception that we stand in opposition to the interests of fossil fuel producing states, as fossil fuels are responsible for the climate crisis we currently face. But to reframe the discussion to one of what we need to do, the similarities between SIDS and oil producers become apparent. We both face the challenges of economies that are not well diversified and reliant on few industries. In our cases, usually tourism and fisheries, and in their cases, oil and gas. In fact, our tourism economies rely on bunker fuels to fly guests to our islands and to transport them on ships and boats. Instead of being antagonistic, we must approach these challenges in a balanced, constructive, and open way. We do have problems to solve, but honestly, and again, I'll get back to that, we must work cooperatively and constructively. And allow me also to use the rest of my time, because I'm seeing the time and place right next to me. But I will offer some reflections on the specific questions that I was asked to address here today. First, regarding how can we strengthen SouthSouth Corporation to better respond to the triple planetary crisis? I think the response to this is twofold. First, we need to embrace, or rather re-embrace, the multilateralism, which has been under attack in recent years. We need to recommit to solving these problems collectively and take efforts not to disengage with states on these issues, because we may not support their actions in another sphere. If our rhetoric that time is running out is honest, the scientists tell us it is, then we need to work together even if we don't see eye to eye on everything. Second, we need more events like this one. We need space to come together as diplomats, scientists, civil society, academia, all stakeholders, youth representatives that have an interest in addressing these problems. Because no one actor can move at the pace and scale we need. We must work in concert. That will require coordination and space to share ideas, debate them, and get on the same page and push forward together. And I think everyone here today could be testament to that, because I think we came out with some good ideas in our breakout groups, and it was very lively. But that wouldn't happen if we're not talking to each other. On the question of the challenges and opportunities to strengthen coordination of Latin American, Caribbean states in multilateral fora dedicated to climate and other social issues, this is actually an interesting one. Our region is very diverse. The interests of nations are varied. The politics of our region are complicated. But again, we have no choice, but we have to work well together. As the Caribbean, we have long worked closely with each other on climate change and development issues at the UN for decades. And our coordination is done alongside our fellow island countries in the Pacific and Indian Ocean like Maldives under the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. As AOSIS, we are a diverse coalition, but we have been extremely effective advocates for our common interests at the UN and its various processes. AOSIS includes over 40 members across the planet, stretching from Cuba to Singapore to Nauru. Yet with this diverse set of interests and development profiles, we do find common ground. I think this stems from a recognition of the importance of the greater good than national interests. Of course, we don't cross national red lines. We have to be pragmatic. But we operate in a manner where we want to seek consensus and we want to work together, so we bring everybody along. We want to understand each other's challenges and commonality between us. These lessons can be instructive in negotiating blocks, including in our Latin American Caribbean region. For a myriad of reasons, including globalization, improved transportation links, and for other reasons, we have space to recast partnerships and both forge and deepen links with other parts of the world. At the UN, for example, we have successfully forged an Africa-CARICOM collaboration initiative, AFCAR. I think our region can continue to both deepen our links within the region and across with others in the Global South in Africa and Asia. Finally, I will quickly touch on the last question of a successful example of regional coordination to achieve climate justice and a fairer global response to the triple planetary crisis. Here again, I would point, and the Ambassador Hussein this morning mentioned the Loss and Damage Fund at the recent COP in Egypt. This idea started with our AOSIS family, who was also initially supported by the least developed countries. And I am certain, as she had also pointed out, it was because of the strength and the unity of the G77 that the South was able to stay united on the issue and able to ensure that our calls were not ignored in a difficult situation. And we also have, because we talk about, successes, and I think we have to build from strength to strength. And another, I think, example on the horizon, and is already a success, that the UN high-level panel on the development of a multidimensional vulnerability index, which is co-chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, His Excellency Gaston Brown, and the former Prime Minister of Norway, Her Excellency Erna Solberg. They co-chaired this panel, and there was an interim report that was released, I believe, last August. It's in a comment period, and our new chair of Samoa has called for that process, hopefully to be completed this year. So hopefully we'll have an MVI, and I know we're gonna, in some of our takeaways from the breakout groups, some of the ideas we discussed will be shared there. So with that, I know we have other panelists. So again, I want to thank all the organizers, and thank you everyone for the time here today. Thanks, Nudhara.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your sort of clear, concise, but also thought-provoking remarks. And as you mentioned, we'll hear more from our breakout group about some of the points that the Ambassador mentioned. I want to touch on one specific thing that you said, which is almost a juxtaposition, so to say, that we can't homogenize the Global South as sort of one entity, but equally, no one can do this alone. And in essence, then, it's a collective action problem, right? When we think of climate justice and just transition, which means that it's not only the countries that are under existential threat that need to be worried about this. It's equally the regions that maybe aren't under existential threat. So, Dr. Maria João, I'm going to turn to you. You've been working with the European Union for much of your career, and it would be great to get sort of your perspective on this, as well as sort of coming from the Europe and the North-South cooperation too. So over to you.
Thanks. And look, let me come with my own contribution. I hope the sound is fine, because otherwise it's better for me to use a microphone. Yeah. It's okay? Good. Look, my thoughts about this issue are the following. The SouthSouth Corporation and interregional cooperation is vital to save humankind and protect our planet. This is becoming more and more clear. But we also know that in order to be at the level we need to be, there are common but differentiated responsibilities. So how can we move forward? And look, I'm coming from the north. I'm coming from the European Union, a rich area in the world. Nevertheless, I'm always trying to make my best not to be Eurocentric. So let me tell you how I think about this. Building on the recent experience, incredible collective experience we went through with the pandemics. Because we understood with the pandemics that nobody is safe until everybody is safe. And somehow we can transfer this metaphor to the triple planetary crisis, I believe. Nobody, don't have illusions, nobody will be safe until everybody will be safe. And this means that what should be the message to come with a kind of new global deal to address this planetary crisis? Is that when developed countries are saying, we are all of us confronted with the triple planetary crisis, and you, developing countries, you must understand that in your efforts to develop agriculture, industry, services, housing, transports, better conditions for your population, you cannot follow the path we have followed. Because if you follow, we have unsustainable imbalances in our planet. This is the message the South is receiving from the North, isn't it? And now it comes the unfair part of the story. The South doesn't have the entire means to go to another way, because this is very expensive. This means a lot of investment. This means a lot of innovation in new technological solutions. Therefore, we need to organize a much higher level of cooperation between North and South, without which nobody will be safe. This is the situation we are in. And this is the frank talk I believe the South should send to the North. So this means that you need to have much larger scale cooperation instruments for technological transfer, for financial support. Large scale investments are needed, private and public, and also making the best of another tool we had no time to discuss in depth in this conference, but which is trade. Trade is a powerful tool to leverage development if this is framed in the right way. And I think trade agreements should support the implementation of sustainable development goals in all sectors and in all countries involved. Otherwise, this is not a good trade agreement. So, if you want to go in this direction, what should be the way, how to make this happen? This is my second point. This is a point of global politics. How to change reality. And here I have some questions addressed to the South, because the questions are, which are the channels which can be used by the South? Adriana this morning recorded very interestingly all the previous experience with the New World Order, which gave birth to the UNCTAD. All this remains very interesting and very relevant and needs to be somehow, I believe, updated. So there is a channel, the G77. Many of you are underlining the difficulties because of the internal diversity. but well, this is a question I'm addressing. So this is one channel. What can be done with G77? The other channel I really see is the G20, also because of these incredible coincidence that we have a sequence of southern countries sharing the G20. We started in Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. This is a unique opportunity to rebalance global governance. I believe this is also building on my own experience of the most advanced case of regional integration, the European Union, that if the macro regional organizations, they come to the table, this can also help. Just imagine that we could have regular meetings, not as an alternative, as a complement of what I'm saying, regular meetings to push for SDGs agenda involving the main regional organizations of the world. European Union, African Union, ASEAN. And when it comes Latin America or Southern America, I also have a question for you. Which is the best format Latin America or Southern American can become a stronger global actor? Because this is needed. What is the best format? And I can tell you from the European history, this was not an easy choice. How to start building a regional organization. And how to become a political actor, not only an economic actor. We have made several choices about who to bring with us. And I believe there is something to be clarified when it comes Latin America or Southern America. View from the outside is not very clear. Who is the central regional organization? Who will be playing as a global actor along with the European Union, African Union? So I'd like also to see clear about this. My final point, because I was invited to also to refer about what can be done from the European Union side. So a little bit of information about this. The European Union has accepted to submit itself to a revision of its implementation of Sustainable Development Goals this year, the entire European Union. We do have an internal coordination about this, and all member states of the European Union have national plans to implement SDGs. And they should be consistent with the financial support from national budgets and the European budget. Second point, we try to project this in our external relationships. So this means that, of course, we are active in ODA, everybody knows this, but my point is we need to go farther. Europe has trade agreements with many other partners across the world. So trade policy of the European Union should be fully consistent with SDGs in both sides, meaning we want to respect these SDGs, but we cannot use this as a protectionism argument. I cannot now elaborate on this, but I know the problem is there. Third point, we have a role in Bretton Woods institutions, and I believe that overall we need to push for Bretton Woods reform to be part of a general reform of global governance, which we could call 2.0 or whatever, which should be able to deliver a much higher organic cooperation to cope with the triple planetary crisis. So this should involve, of course, the reform of the environmental pillar of the United Nations. This should involve a reform of the way ECOSOC performs. But as you know, we have even bolder ideas on the table. Emergency platforms and even a possible resilience council to be composed by a real representation of the world, which is no longer the case of the current Security Council. So, look, I will stop here just by clarifying that what I said is not necessarily the official message of the European Union. I represent a powerful network of actors in the European Union, but they are a kind of progressive actors. So I can be a bit bolder, and I try to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria João. So just to clarify, Maria João is not the European Union, but she has massive influence, and we love that. We wish she was. Thank you, Fernanda. But so the three sort of big things that came out, Dr. João, from your intervention is the importance of trade and using sort of other mechanisms to include them in the environment, greater transparency from the global north, which in turn enables SouthSouth Corporation as well, because it's clearer sort of what different regions are thinking about. But importantly, intra-regional organizations, sort of within the region, and having sort of those clear focal points, those clear leaders in different processes as well. So thinking about this point of intra-regional organization, but also inter-regional. Ambassador Mohammed, you are Nigeria's ambassador in Brazil. You sort of, in the essence of your job description, cross regions. So what are some of your insights, both within your region, but across regions as well?
Thank you so much, the coordinator. Let me start by saying extending my appreciation first for the invitation to attend this conference. It came to me as a surprise, frankly, to participate. I mean, to be invited to speak at such a gathering of experts, diplomats, professionals, members of international bodies, like the CPO, where Dr. Aridonina, of course, has held sway, giving us directions. And for the first time, I'm hearing some of the exponential expositions she made in the beginning. I began to wonder, where am I really? Am I really in the same world with the arenas? Because many things are new to me, obviously. So I impressed by the fact that I have been participating at academic levels for many things to do with the environment and environmental degradation, environment, sustainable development, and so forth. But this really becomes more practical and real. And the first a few remarks she has made has really gingered me into thinking in the correct direction. Dr. Richard warmly welcomed me to this place from you. I'm very happy to do that in global governance. Dr. Magnus Yvonne, of course, and also the rest of the team. We had Her Excellency Mary Robinson also. I will receive her online, and Jose Graziano, Dr. Isabella. So thank you so much for the guidance, because these are the first generation of people who have fought strongly to streamline the processes for us. So we really appreciate, and the dogged fight every time, at every occasion, to do that is highly commendable and recognized. Dr. Maria Jesso Rodrigues, thank you so much again. And of course, the team of supporters and my colleagues, let me take this opportunity to thank you for having me around today and for listening to some aspects of a few things that we observe what's going on in the other side of the South-South relationships, specifically in Africa. As a diplomat, looking at, promoting the interests of Nigeria in Brazil and trying to work together to deepen the relationships, we are here to explore all the opportunities that are possible in order to make this happen, to make the two countries move together, cooperate together in so many different ways. And we have been enjoying this since independence in 1960 for Nigeria. And for Africa in general, I would say as a member of the African Group of Diplomats, for information, Brazil hosts at least 32 African countries diplomatic missions in Africa. I mean, African diplomatic missions in Brazil, and over 178 formations in different locations. So we're very well represented. If you look at Africa, we have about 52 countries, 32 are represented in Brazil. So it's a significant number is already here. The West African region alone has at least up to 8 to 9 ambassadors. The Northeast, I mean, this eastern part, about 4 or 5 of them are still around. And northern part, you have about 4 or 5 also again. So putting all this together is quite a substantial number. And we dialogue about all these challenges that frontally affect the globe and see how we can facilitate, how we can work together to cement some relationships in which Africa would immensely begin to understand and join forces with the rest of the world in overcoming some of these challenges. It is towards this end I felt maybe I should share some of the observations on the topics that are provided. That is the global governance and the triple planetary crisis, specifically the climatic change, biodiversity, and nature loss, as well as pollution and waste. Africa as a whole probably constitute less than 3% of the emissions, but is the victim for most of the ills or this crisis, presented by this crisis. In the last few years, if you notice, the stories in the newspapers, as the mass media generally, still show to the extent at which this devastation has affected most regions in Africa. In particular in Nigeria, for instance, there are so many communities that have been washed due to floods, overflowing of bank rivers, because the direct effect of the climate change. The desert encroachment is obvious, not only in Nigeria, about the 14 countries in the north, but Sahara deserts. This also for the Kalahari Desert in the Sudan, and the obvious challenges of water usage management in the Nile River across Egypt, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the rest of the regions. In all these, the manifestations and the effects of climate change are very evident. It's uncontrovertible, contributing to the global debate on debate to tackle them and ensure just transition. The African countries have no option but to work together regionally, internally, as well as work at the continental level, as well as at the regional level, and the global level, in order to ensure a just transition. A just transition in the sense that we participate, utilize available scientific and technological knowledge available in order to address the situation we are in. Some of the specific activities that AU, the African Union, has taken include a number of measures which member countries are expected to comply with. In the first instance, there is a very declared support for a SouthSouth Corporation. AU has emphasized this because we know that what affects us also affects many parts of the South, and they are more actively promoting these issues to their advantage, and have always demonstrated ability to work with Africa in addressing these major challenges. So most of these center both at the regional level as well as the South-South level to create the enabling environment that will enable them work together. So in having a South-South and inter-regional cooperation to bring about climate justice, and just transition in Africa. The AU and under the UN, in conformity with the UN resolutions, have significantly addressed climate change and promote a just transition to a low carbon future. Low carbon future. Through that, the UN has established a number of frameworks and initiatives to address these and its impact. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement are all known to all of us. And the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is a global treaty signed by all countries to limit the emission of greenhouse gases, and then to address the limitations of not more than 2%, 2 degrees temperature increases, to make sure it comes below 2%, above pre-industrial levels. This is a very Herculean target, which all countries are working towards. Equally, there's the Green Climate Fund, some kind of a resilient to give developing countries, which most African countries belong to support the transition from low carbon and climate resilient economies. Then again, and the UN development program also works with these countries to facilitate adoption of these climate initiatives. And in addition, the African Union has also taken a number of steps to address climate change and promote the justice. In 2015, the AU adopted an agenda targeting 2063, which outlined the vision of the future of Africa, the goals relating to climate change, and the promotion of the renewable energy and development of climate resilient infrastructure. As you know, Africa heavily relies on fossil fuels all over, even though the facilities and opportunities of these resources abound in almost every part of Africa. We have non-renewable sources of energy, from solar to wind to many others, but these are grossly underutilized because we don't have the technology and the capacity to move them and make them available to the vast majority of people. This is a major challenge, and these are opportunities for us to collaborate with regions and countries that have this capacity in order to raise it to ensure the just transition with the minimal challenges. On the SouthSouth Corporations, which you can see the Latin Americans are a better organization and better focused in this respect, have been extending our hands. I remember I was recently, the German corporation from the north has started incubating entrepreneurs in many developing countries, including Nigeria, to start solar furnace production and employ of solar energy. One way of ensuring that the renewable energy, access to renewable energy is facilitated and is widely, the knowledge of it is widely extended to different strata of the different parts of Africa. And this is going on. Similar replicable efforts in different parts of Africa can certainly change the narration in this community. From all indications, embracing multilateralism in these areas are critical to moving Africa into the 21st century efforts at just transition. In a number of fora, we have issues with regards to cooperation within Africans themselves. Let us take just a typical case. In Lake Chad. Lake Chad is one of the major lakes from where about 7 countries benefit from the water resources that abound in Lake Chad. There are many lakes across Africa, of course. And this is just to give you the extent of the problem that we are having in terms of generating the necessary cooperation in order to address these global challenges. Out of these 7 countries, namely Niger, Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, Central African Republic, what other one is it? Even up to Algeria and up to Central African Republic are all benefiting from Lake Chad. Over the last 30, 40 years, this lake has shrunk to less than 30% of its original size, rendering over 40 million dependent farmers, pastoralists, fishermen, and other stakeholder users of the environment to less than its 30% potentials. So far, there has been initiatives, cooperation among African countries that are affected by this development to come together and ensure that they revive this lake through various considerations. The resolutions have been made, the efforts have been made, but up to today, nothing has has been achieved. And you can see the similar situations if you look at the Nile River in Egypt. From Eritrea to Chad to up to Egypt, down to Ethiopia, Eritrea, down to Egypt, you find the utilization. Oh goodness! So I'll try to round up. So this is a similar situation. In all these, what we are trying to indicate is the fact that while these global challenges affect all parts of the world, the inter and the intra-regional cooperations are vital to making a success of the just transition. And it is for this that I will say that we need, I'm sorry, I will just give 1 second, just 1, 2 sentences, that's all. I'll just give it out. It is on these two, that we are calling for more appreciation of the challenges that Africa is currently in terms of access to sensitivity, access to technology, access to, and then facilitations of cooperation with the other parts of the world, especially the southern counterparts in Latin America, in making our transition fair and more robust in subsequent years to come. I'm sorry, I'm the only person outside the UN system, so I'm sorry that you have to bear with me for this thing. So, but I hope we'll have time to in a deeper sense, look at the specific recommendations that we made regarding how Africa can be integrated into the concept.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your remarks. And you know, I just also want to point out, the region, the AU youth envoy of your region is also very, very active in the climate space, a dear friend of mine. And I think she's mentioned many of the points that you have, and I'm sure we'll have time for more discussion about what you mentioned as well with the rest of the group. We've had sort of the ambassadors give their perspective. We've had sort of the regional think tanks give their perspective. But I want to turn now very quickly to a practitioner's perspective with Fernando. But before I bring in Fernando, I just want to quickly point out to the room that we'll do a rapid fire Q&A, and we'll aim to get that in just at the end. So especially looking at some of our younger participants to be ready to fire in your questions, and we'll do sort of a blitz round straight after. But before that, Fernando, over to you.
Thank you, Nudhara, very much. Yeah, I know that we are short of time, so thanks for the invitation to the organizers, and greetings to all the distinguished panelists. Well, the triple planetary crisis is the focus of the event. However, something that I've seen in the past is that despite the mutual relationships between biodiversity and climate change, pollution, so since the birth of the climate change conventions and the biodiversity conventions, they have generally been treated in isolation. At their inceptions, neither the CBD or the UNFCCC had made any express reference to the other. However, and this reflection, however, I think that within the international regulatory framework, this situation has evolved a lot, and the links are becoming increasingly more evident. And actually one of the first agreements in which the relationship between biodiversity and climate change was recognized was the Nagoya Project. And later, the close links between biodiversity and climate change were visibly more exposed through the adoption of the Paris Agreement. So having this in mind, I also have witnessed that even the cooperation agencies are looking now at the planetary crisis as a whole, and not from a siloed perspective, as it was seen before. Often it's seen that despite the efforts of all the different stakeholders who are acknowledging that the environmental crisis is interconnected, and the international cooperation agencies sometimes fail to coordinate with each other to ensure more coherent and articulated support. So, for example, for me, it would be amazing to see all the incredible experiences shared today systematized in a one-stop shop that's accessible for all, for example. But coming back to the South-to-South experiences and perspective and thoughts. So within the UN system, there are several coordination platforms for integrated programming. Although those platforms are not perfect, they provide them space to better coordinate and avoid duplicity and enhance the scope of our cooperation. But nevertheless, there are many more agencies, NGOs, international organizations, academia, civil society, all working in the environmental flora. Thus, it's utterly important and necessary to ensure the creation of other types of coordination platforms or programs that allow these many stakeholders to converse to each other and plan together to provide integrated support to countries and make smart decisions and smart investments that allow to increase the impact of our interventions. So from what I've heard, it's, and here probably taking from your words, Nudhara, at the beginning, that we can talk about Global South, and also the problem, the planetary crisis is global. The Global South, as you mentioned, is not an homogeneous entity, and the problems needs to be seen regionally, and each region have different challenges and realities, probably need to be addressed differently and in a differentiated manner. So in my experience, I have seen and participated from different platforms and programs that are already doing so, and I would like to provide a few examples from the LAC region. One of the examples is, of course, from UNDP. Since 2019, we have launched the Climate Promise Program, which is the world's largest program to support the development and implementation of national determined contributions, the NDCs. Now we have more than 120 countries part of this program worldwide. And also the nature of this program is global. It has a regional implementation approach that recognizes the particularities and reality of each region. And to implement the Climate Promise, we have partnered, and here it's very important what Ambassador Maguire was saying. We have partnered with 35 different cooperation agencies, NGOs, international organizations to provide articulated support, customized to each region and responding to individual country needs, for example. And also in recognition to the triple planetary crisis, the offer of support of the Climate Promise was designed to use the implementation of the NDCs as the arrowhead to connect the dots between climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, air pollution, but also, here also taking the words of the Ambassador Makarfi, the inclusion of social and economic aspects to promote just transition to a more sustainable path and leaving no one behind. And another example that I would like to highlight is the Global Action Partnership, which is a global platform composed of sub-regional platforms. That in the case of LAC, there is the Let's LAC platform. This platform so far has proven to be highly successful, bringing together different stakeholders from public and private sectors, international organizations, civil society, and academia to partner on a high ambition coalitions, creating innovative solutions and promoting peer learning. So what I'm trying to say here is that these platforms and programs do not necessarily need to be created under a specific international framework or institution, but certainly require institutional will to actually work and be operational in the future. An example, a quick example, and probably the last one I'm going to provide today, is the work that is being done in the Latin American and Caribbean region with the taxonomy working group, which is formed by UNEP, the World Bank, UNDP, we have ECLAC, IDB, the CAF, FAO, all together. We have also support from the European Union through the Euro Climate Plus program. So this is kind of an ad hoc working group that decided to coordinate together to build a common framework of sustainable finance taxonomies in Latin America and the Caribbean. So after listening everything that has been said in this panel, I firmly believe that we are in the right path. However, there's still need to replicate these good practices, find a way to bring more actors together to the conversation, create more spaces, not only to have conversations, but to make decisions on how we're going to roll out different activities and actions in the future. It's necessary that all different stakeholders actually recognize their urgency of addressing this triple planetary crisis. And here I would like to echo the words of Ambassador Maguire that no one single region can do it at all. Alone we can probably go faster, but together we can definitely go farther, and that's the way that I think that we should approach to this triple planetary crisis that is ahead of us right now.
Thank you so much for those concise but really important remarks that you gave us. Just to quickly, the headline takeaways from this panel in my sort of humble, somewhat, able kind of approach to it. So we heard about the importance of the science policy interface, but also including new and inclusive knowledge, including the indigenous knowledge and not just data as we know data in the global north. We talked about issues and institutional linkages, whether it be linking trade, whether it be linking sort of other expertise to the climate agenda and other institutions to the climate agenda. We heard about greater transparency coming from different regions to allow for interregional cooperation. We talked about intra and inter-regional cooperation, taking on even sort of a roadmap approach. So starting with cooperation around one river or one forest, and then what does that lead to, and what does that lead to, and sort of these marginal but important steps forward. And finally, we ended with this thought of really what are the platforms then for cooperation? What are the knowledge transfers that can occur? What are the action-oriented knowledge management systems that can be expanded, and what's the demand there? I know that just from the Just Transition group, we'll talk a little bit more about sort of demand-driven knowledge transfers, but that's another topic for another plenary. Just to open the floor here to different thoughts and questions from the group, what we'll do to the panel is we'll go round very quickly, and then we'll go to the panel for some sort of closing thoughts. So I see Renata, and then I see here Rihanna, Marcella as well, and then we'll pick up one or two more and we'll go from there. If we could keep it brief so we could get multiple people in. Renata. Can you hear me? Oh.
Agora? Thank you very much for this amazing debate. I would like to ask Ambassador Carlos. We could see how sorry, eu vou falar em português.
I will speak in Portuguese. I would like to know, we have seen a growth and expansion of organized crime in the Amazon region, which ends up expanding illicit activities, environmental crime. So I would like to know which is the agenda of the ATCO for this area.
Okay, thank you, Renata.
Muito obrigada, Renata. Rihanna?
Okay.
Oh, Marcella. Okay, here we go.
Okay. Olá, olá. Então, eu gostaria de provocar, na
I would
verdade, mais do
like
que uma
to
pergunta,
provoke, more than asking a
sobre como essa
question,
estrutura
about
formal
how
dos
this
acordos
formal
da
structure
ONU,
of the
ela
agreements and the
acaba não
UN
contemplando o debate que a
ends
gente está
up
fazendo aqui sobre
not
cooperação
taking into
sul-sul, porque se
account the
contemplasse, a gente não estava
debate
aqui
on
fazendo esse
South-South
debate.
Cooperation,
E aí é
because if
muito no
it did,
sentido
we
de
weren't
pensar que
here
falar de
debating
direitos
that.
humanos é também
So
falar do
talking
direito à
about human
informação,
rights is
e a
also to
informação
talk about
sobre
the right
mudança
to
climática, ela
information,
muitas das vezes não
information
está acessível
on
no sentido de
climate change,
linguagem, no sentido
and
de
very
acesso,
often it's
e no
not
sentido até de
accessible in terms of
interesse.
the
Então,
language used
falar
and
da
the interest.
juventude,
So
né, e
to
que quer a
talk
participação da
about the
juventude,
youth,
muitas das vezes
we
também
hear
facilitar um
that
pouco para que a nossa participação
we are
seja
asked to
possível. Isso não
participate, but it's
acontece dentro da
also
estrutura formal que a
it's
gente
also
precisa
necessary to
respeitar,
make it
mas todo
possible
tipo de
for
estrutura
us to
sistêmica foi criado por
participate,
alguém, estabelecido
and
por
so
alguém, e
all this
precisa ser
systemic structure has been
restabelecido e
created
recriado
by
sempre que a gente
someone
entender que não
and
está mais
needs to be
funcionando.
recreated once you
Então,
understand that
quando
it
que a gente
doesn't
vai
working anymore.
considerar que esse
So
cenário de
how
violação, seja
can we
ambiental, seja de
consider
direitos
that
humanos,
this
que exclui
scenario
a
of
juventude, as
violation,
mulheres,
whether
as
it
crianças,
is gender
ele é
related,
também
is
um pouco da
climate
nossa
related,
responsabilidade
and
enquanto autoridades,
considers
enquanto
women,
pessoas que
children,
pesquisam, enquanto
and
pessoas que têm
others,
as
and
oportunidades de
as
assentar nessas
people
mesas,
who
e ao mesmo tempo estamos em
to
Recife,
do
no Brasil, e todo mundo
research,
está
and
falando
we are here
inglês,
in Recife,
e ao
in
mesmo
Brazil,
tempo a
and
gente está em
everybody
Recife, no
speaking
Brasil,
English,
e
and we are
muito
here
do
in Recife,
diálogo
Brazil, and
acaba
a
não
lot of the
passando pela
dialogue
juventude presente
really
na
doesn't
mesa.
reach the
E, enfim, queria
young
provocar também que a
people
gente
present
pensasse
here
que
at the table. So
cooperação é
I
muito do
think
que
that
Chai Suruí ontem
cooperation
comentou
has a
sobre
lot to
ser
do with
porta.
what
Então,
Chai
até que ponto
Suruí said
estamos
about being
disponíveis
strong
para ser portas
and
e abrir
up
caminhos
to
para que a
being
nova geração,
doors,
os
being
novos
gates,
ativistas,
and to what extent are we
efetivamente possam
open
participar desse debate, não só
to
como a
really
cota e os fantoches que têm que estar
enable
sentados na
young
mesa,
people
mas
and
colocando as
youth
suas
to
reais
participate
demandas e
and open the
preocupações e
gates for them,
utilizando novas
and
estratégias. Então, para
listening
dar
to the
exemplo,
voices
utilizar a
of
cultura,
the
as redes
youth, to use
sociais, a
culture,
tecnologia, traduzir em
social
mais do que somente
agencies,
5 línguas, talvez
technology,
traduzir para
and
10
so
línguas, exemplo que
maybe
a
not
gente conversou
translate this
hoje lá
only
sobre
into
o
5
COP21.
languages,
Então,
but
acho
maybe
que
into 10
existem novas
languages.
possibilidades
So
para a
I
gente fazer
think
uma
there are
verdadeira
new
cooperação,
possibilities
mas
to
para isso a
carry
gente tem que
out a
falar sobre
real
privilégio
cooperation,
e sobre
but
estrutura e
we need
combater essa
also to
estrutura
raise
de forma
privileges
radical. E muitas das
and
vezes combater essa
structures
estrutura de
and
forma
how
radical é uma
to
coisa que a gente não vai fazer, que
fight
precisa dar
them
mais
in a
trabalho do que
radical
o trabalho
way,
que já
and
está
very
sendo
often
exercido.
we don't
Mas se a
do
gente não
that
fizer
because it's
isso, a gente
a
acaba
lot of
ficando no
effort.
mesmo lugar,
But if
que é
we
um
don't
lugar
do
em
that,
que muito se fala,
we
pouco se
keep
faz e
staying
menos
at the
ainda
same place
acontece
where a lot
para
is
quem está
said,
realmente sendo afetado
little
e
is being
realmente precisando
done,
da
and little
mudança. Então,
happens for
a minha
those who are
provocação
directly
é essa.
affected. So
Se
that's
Chai
my
Suruí diz que quer ser
provocation.
porta, e se a gente concorda com
Chai
ela,
Suruí
como que
says
todo mundo que
she
está sentado
considers
aqui vai ser
herself
porta
a
também
gate
para
and
abrir
a
mais
door.
caminhos e
So
novas
how can
possibilidades
each and
de
every
romper essa
one of
estrutura
us
de uma
be
verdadeira
also a
mudança?
door and the
É isso.
gate to promote real
Thank you
change?
so much, Marcela, for those
Muito
thoughtful
obrigada,
remarks.
Marcela,
Rana, over to you, and then
pela
go
sua
to Eduardo
contribuição.
and come back to
Ana,
Ahmad.
depois vamos para Eduardo e depois voltamos ao
Vai parecer que a
painel.
gente combinou a fala,
So
mas a
it
gente não
seems
combinou a
it would
fala
look as
e
if
inquietações
we
similares.
had
Eu
agreed
queria
upon
agradecer
what to
pelo
say here
painel
now.
por
I would like to
compartilharem
thank the
suas ideias e
panel
experiências.
for
E
sharing
eu sei que a discussão
experiences
da
and
gente tem
ideas.
sido
I
muito
know that
baseada em decisões
our
do
discussion
global
has
para o
been
local.
based very
Mas eu
much
queria
on
trazer uma inquietação do ponto de vista contrário, do local para o global, a
to the
nível de
global
pessoas.
local approach,
Alguns
and I would
países
like to
tratam a
turn this
educação
thing around.
climática como uma
Some
estratégia de
people
adaptação para
address
atingir a
climate
justiça
education
climática.
as a
E aí o
strategy
que eu
of
queria saber é
adaptation to
se
achieve
existe uma
climate
estratégia
justice.
nos
I would
países
like
de
to know if there
vocês
is a
de
strategy in your
educação
countries
climática,
with regard to
se
climate
existe ou se não
education.
existe, como é que a
If it
cooperação
exists or doesn't
sul-sul pode
exist, how
influenciar
can the SouthSouth
o
Corporation
compartilhamento dessa
influence the
agenda,
sharing of this
pensando
agenda,
que o acesso à
thinking
justiça
that
climática
the
passa
access
também
to
por uma
climate justice
educação
also
e por
involves
saber que algum
education,
problema está
and
acontecendo e por
of
saber principalmente como
acknowledging that
enfrentar aquele
problems are
problema.
happening and how
Então,
to
a gente não
address
pode
these
esperar que
problems.
as
So we
crianças e os
cannot just
adolescentes de
wait
hoje
and
se
expect
tornem adultos
that
para ter
young people and
uma noção da
children
complexidade
become
do tema.
adults to
Se a
have
gente quer que
an
realmente
idea of the
jovens
complexity
ocupem
of
cada
them. We
vez mais
want
espaço, a
young
gente
people
precisa
to
oferecer essas
occupy
ferramentas. Então,
wider
minha pergunta
spaces.
é
We
mais
need to
voltada
offer
para
to them
estratégias
these
mesmo de
tools,
educação. A
and
gente
so we
pode
would like to
pensar
know
nisso
about
como uma
strategies of
estratégia
education education,
perspectiva,
so we can
como é
to
que a
think
gente
about
cria em
that
parceria
and
algo que seja
how we
compartilhável a
can
nível de cooperação
build
sul-sul.
something which can be shared in terms of
Thank
the
you so much,
education and the
Anna,
South-South
for
perspective.
those remarks as well about climate education as a strategy for adaptation. Question to the group as to what sort of some strategies you're thinking of in your countries. Eduardo.
Boa tarde, vereador Eduardo Zanata,
Good
do
afternoon.
Partido dos
I'm a
Trabalhadores
council
de
member,
Balneário
Eduardo
Camboriú, que é
Zanata,
uma cidade
of the
pequena e
Workers'
turística
Parties
no estado de
in
Santa Catarina, ao sul do Brasil.
Camboriú, in
Por que
the
eu
state
digo
of
isso?
South
Porque
Santa Catarina. Why am I saying that? Because right now, and since yesterday we have been discussing, while we have been discussing, our city has been affected by the third flood in a period of a month, and politicians very often do not establish this connection between these issues. So I listened with great interest to what Ambassador Hussein mentioned this morning with regard to Maldives, and because this connection is not seen by our administrators and politicians. My question is addressed to Ambassador Carlos Vazani, because yesterday Dr. Secretary General talked about the lack of concrete solutions and mismatches in the agenda. So going back to my state, Santa Catarina, we have some concrete solutions so developed by the Association of the Industries and called solar, and so this involves a photovoltaic bonus with an incentive attached to it, because the unit of electricity generation in Santa Catarina, in spite of the sun not shining that much in our state, we have now we rank fourth in generating solar energy in Brazil. Why do I say that? Because I think that the way we get organized, when there is a mismatch between the solutions, we see that just transition needs to include people, include persons. This involves also decent work and decent salaries. So I have been taking notes these days in order to convey these observations to our local level. And I found it very interesting what the ambassador said, that in spite of the ideological differences and party differences in Latin America over the last years, so we have an urgency in Brazil. Over the last 4 years, there has been a negation of climate change in Brazil. So we have suffered here in Brazil by biopiracy. We know that it's necessary to maintain livelihoods and the tree and the forest standing. Biopiracy with regard to acai, which has been patented by the Japanese, cupuaçu, which has been patented by Europeans and North Americans. So I ask, is there any dialogue with the communities on the local level, because there are cooperatives which work with the production of these produce in the Amazon region.
So much, Eduardo, for those comments. Okay, so back to the panel. Challenge to the panelists. 5 minutes, 5 panelists. I think we can make this work. I will first go over to Ambassador Carlos for your thoughts, and panelists, feel free to sort of pick a question or two. There's no need to sort of respond to all of them. We'll get to them through the panel. Ambassador.
Muito rapidamente, a questão dos ilícitos
with regard,
foi tratada muito mais na Unasul do que na OTCA.
So the Unasul addressed the TCA. So what we have been doing is, so with the deactivation of Unasul, we are incorporating this agenda in those aspects which have to do with the positive agenda, which I mentioned here in my presentation. So what we are going to do is to bring together the public policies in this field in order to build the capacity of all, so that we can act at the same level. One of the programs we have is the control of legal trade of the specificities in the Annex 1 and 2. So what we're going to do is to bring together all countries in the same page and to do the mapping out in real time in order to address the extinction of species and the threat to extinction of species, because this will enable what is being written, so that the actions of command and control can be better directed to what is not yet contemplated in this
que já está no Observatório Regional Amazônico. E o Observatório Regional Amazônico tem
and the Amazon Regional Observatory has this method and this characteristic to serve as a door that was mentioned here for all of these people who have some kind of interest in the Amazon from the perspective of the 8 countries, and we're actually joining in UTCA all of those people and provide all of the information that will be useful for people of the Amazon, and those interested in it will see themselves reflected and regulated in a dynamic process, which is already the Regional Observatory of the Amazon, and it is work under construction. We'll have 2 pillars, 2 modules that were assembled, water resources and monitoring, and we are incorporating the module for climate change, the module for healthcare, and other modules as well, in a way that they will all be recognized and meeting each other in the observatory. We have many high school students, university students as well. Actually, 2 days ago, we had a group of 40 students in the National University of Brasilia with different schools, different international organizations, and others to talk about things that are in the Amazon and see how these are inserted in their reality and how they can incorporate in this project. So this is also something the observatory wants to do, to be a meeting place for the new generations, but not only in Brazil. Although Brazil is large, it's not the entirety of the Amazon because it involves 8 countries. When it comes to local and global, that's the same. The challenge we have is dealing with local issues. So, as the Amazon is so large, what UTCA is saying is focusing on borders and border points. So we are bringing radio devices for indigenous tribes located in 7 points of the border. The triple border between Brazil, Suriname, and Guyana, and the triple border between Brazil, Peru, and Bolivia. The border between Peru and Ecuador, and Colombia and Ecuador as well. So this is a theme that was also bringing equipment to guarantee the chain of code. So this is it's really important to have good solutions and good practices that we are now collecting in terms of biodiversity, but this will be amplified for all of the areas with this whole calendar, not calendar, but a list of those good experiences which are being presented and brought to the observatory by the countries in a way to spread the word of good practices for all of the Amazon within this process of obtaining funds to ensure these projects will be regionalized. That's all from me. I don't want to monopolize the 5 minutes we have left.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And we'll request everyone to try and keep it as brief as possible. Myra is glaring at me from across the room, but it's not coming from me. I promise. But we'll go to Ambassador Maguire for your remarks.
Thank you, Nudhara, and thank you for all the comments and the questions. And I would like to, since it's the end, thank the fellow panelists, because I think this has really been a rich discussion, and your thoughts and ideas really have made these exchanges meaningful. So I would just maybe quickly touch on Marcella and Rihanna, and I would just make a few comments. One, I just cannot underscore enough the importance of not just participation of the youth to check a box, but the participation needs to be effective. And I like that you brought the dimension of multilingualism, because I can tell you, as we know at the UN, there's 6 official languages, which, by the way, does not include Portuguese. But even within that, having it as 6 official languages, COVID-19, the impacts of that, there was, some meetings were only in English because of the challenges of doing a remote interpretation. And we heard it and we heard it again, and it really and truly would impact the effective participation even of diplomats. And you heard that complaint. So it's on every level that we're dealing with it. There's no easy answer because, as you said, 10 languages, but I could tell you even doing 6 at the UN sometimes has been a challenge, but it's still an issue that needs to be highlighted. It needs to be in every space. And I think that is how you would get change, to put voice to the issue. Also, there's, I just want to touch on Rihanna's comment about the climate education. And I think that's where SouthSouth Corporation could be very beneficial, because there are lessons learned. I could tell you, dealing with hurricanes and different islands, some of our northern islands are more impacted more frequently. And there is that sort of exchanges of lessons learned. So I think there could be a critical role in terms of that, but in a more structured way, I think is what you're getting at, whether it's in curriculum. Of course, we know the role of civil society. They have that kind of grassroots education. But I think sometimes, but you're seeing that in many ministries, if you talk about governments, which is more of your question. For example, in Grenada, we had formed a climate resilience ministry, like a standalone ministry. And within that, you see that there's more awareness, there's more profile of the issue. But again, ideas such as maybe putting it in the curriculum of schools, and other innovative ideas such as that, so that it is in a consciousness, and you're right. So we actually start coming up with those novel ideas that are needed to this problem. But with that, I end. Thank you very much, everyone. Again.
Thank you, Ambassador. And actually, climate education was a big part of the Transforming Education Summit that happened in September last year. So hopefully that sort of builds traction and becomes something more. Dr. Maria João, over to you, and then we'll come.
Muito bem, e agora eu vou falar em português. Porque agora eu quero falar aqui com...
Now I'll speak Portuguese because I want to talk with our friends who have come with these fantastic points, but I have only one to mention, which is actually really important. I mean, how can our democracies work? How should they start working? I start from the principle that our democracies require the so-called representative pillar with elected politicians, which will be proved whether their board is involved or not, and then the participatory pillar. What I want to raise is that we should give more force to the participatory pillar, because this is really important. This involves the youth, certainly. So I have a recent experience we've had in the scale of the European Union, for you to think whether it's possible to adapt it to your own countries, and then the UN, and so on. This would be ideal. So what is the major innovation we accomplished, and we still are, in order to reinforce participatory democracy? First of all, we should change the citizens, mainly the youth, because they are the ones who will define what points they wanted to have discussed and what new answers they wanted to bring to respond to these challenges. Above all, this is what matters. And nowadays this is possible due to the technology available, and they were heard in every region in Europe, not only the capitals, in all of the regions and in all the languages. In our case, we have 23 languages in Europe. Third thing, some of them have chosen representatives in order to come talk with professional politicians, the Congress folks, and the ministers as well. And there is an extraordinary thing that happened. Everyone was in the same room in the parliament, but the dialogue was completely reversed. The first ones to talk were no ministers nor members of the parliament. The first ones to speak were the representatives of the citizens and the youth, more specifically. This is when the members of the parliament and ministers came to comment and react with regard to what they thought should be done and should not be done. And then there was these several meetings until it got to a point that we were able to identify a list of priorities. there was this final meeting where the list was announced with the commitment of being set in motion. And putting this in motion requires control of what is being implemented or not, and why this has not been implemented yet. So we now have these regular follow-up meetings. It's true that this requires organized work, and it's also true that this was not easy 10 years ago. But currently, we have the technology for it, including speaking in different languages, because the simultaneous translation software is much more effective nowadays. No, depends. But anyway, I wanted to tell you that this experience is happening in Europe, and it shows how possible it is to reinforce growth in a participatory democracy.
Thank you so much, Maria João, and then Ambassador for your brief response.
Okay, I think most of the issues have been addressed squarely by earlier speakers. So probably the only thing I may wish to add is the initiatives that have been taken now to engage institutions of higher learning in developing countries, like in Africa. There are the Centers for Excellence developed by the World Bank, who have mounted the programs for regional cooperation and sensitization for the youth, women, and other interest groups. This has tremendously made an impact across states. In one of them, for instance, in the Center for Dryland Agriculture in Nigeria, students across West Africa and some other Africa have been coming for the last 4 or 5 years. And the central issue is looking at these challenges of global challenges of climate change, which renders some areas to be under desert encroachment, whilst overflooding and other things have also chopped a lot of it, make it unproductive anymore for crop production or for livestock raising. Again, countries like Niger, Mali, while the peripheral of the deserts become no longer productive. These are all as a result of climate change. So these people have been trained now how to drop no crops with shorter varieties, shorter growing seasons, and similar efforts, including, bringing in more technology, more science into confronting combating the problems of climate change. Similarly, for biodiversity, again, we have seen in so many of the forest regions where deforestation has been taking place. Education has been used to educate both the foresters as well as the, especially the students of agriculture and other related fields in most of these countries to respond to this more clearly in a more scientific way. And this has begun to step down to different communities. I have seen that in Ghana, in Gambia, in several other African countries. If this continues, then you have taken the one major step of stepping down training and capacity building for the people that will now propagate this knowledge for overcoming some of the challenges to groups like youth and then women and other possibly victims of climate change and unjust transition. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And Fernando, over to you.
Thank you. Very quick for Marcel and Diana. I love the youth of the Latin American and Caribbean region because we're bold and straight to the point. And to answer the questions is, well, South-to-South cooperation is extremely important for not only youth participation, but meaningful youth participation in the environmental fora and the decision making. So what we need to do is to use South-to-South cooperation to take the best experiences that we have in different countries and replicate them, and even more scale up at regional level. And that actually, this is interesting because I just hung up before joining to this meeting with a last meeting that we have with youth organizations from the LAC region. Probably you know them, Eco House and Sostenibilidad Sin Fronteras, who were organizing the ARCOI or 2022 in Costa Rica. What are we doing with them? We're doing something very interesting, and this is a great example of SouthSouth Corporation. So we are taking the experience of Panama. You may recognize that Panama had the youngest delegation to the COP in 26 and 27. So what's that we mean of meaningful participation? We don't want only your voices to be heard. We want your voices to count and make decisions. So what we're doing is we're creating three things. First, a mapping of organizations that are in Latin America and the Caribbean region, youth organizations. Second, the initiatives of those organizations and what's the impact of those organizations. And all of this in a platform that can be accessible for all the organizations. So far, this is in 3 languages. And of course, I agree with you, Marcel, we had these conversations with Paloma Costa, with Massimo Masoko, that we need to expand this to more different languages to include indigenous young population. So it's still something that needs to be done, but it's something that is already acknowledged. And finally, we're creating an e-learning course based on the experience of Panama, Costa Rica, and Argentina to elevate it at the regional scale. So this course will be accessible for all youth in the Latin American and the Caribbean region, with modules that go from the simplest aspects of climate change, like concepts, to the most relevant aspects for decision making, like what are the negotiation blocks for the different conference of parties. So what we want is a youth that is informed and be able to participate in the decision making fora. But we don't want to do or tell you what to do. We want something that is made from youth to the youth. So we will be guiding the process, and we accompany the process, and make sure that at least from UNDP, the Climate Promise, and we're partnering with other institutions like Oxfam, UNICEF, to make this happen, at least in the region initially, and then taking this experience to make it intra-regionally and replicate it in the rest of the global south.
Thank you so much, Fernando, for those concluding thoughts. We have gone on a journey with this panel. We've sort of gone through the science policy interface. We've talked about regional cooperation, South-South cooperation, inter-regional cooperation, and I think ended with sort of this beautiful intergenerational cooperation as well. And I think, you know, the importance of consulting young people on the climate crisis is the importance of an architect consulting a client. We might not be building the house that you're currently constructing, but we will be living in it. So please ask us, you know, about consulting in the construction of the international system. With that, Maguire is standing up and ready to run at me. So I will conclude this panel. Thank you all again for your contributions. And hand over to our fabulous organizer one last time.
So I really don't know what to do, because the closing panel should have already started. So, but there is a lot of coffee and food there. So what I suggest is that you go grab coffee and food, but bring it here so we can start as soon as possible, if that works for everyone. Okay.
Please.